So here we are in Struggle of Empires. The Austrians went first, built up a couple more troops in Germany, still trying to get enough strength to do something about the Brits that they promised to do. The Brits took a couple actions. They moved their navy to India. They were going to move the forces down and try to take a cheap point, or 3 points perhaps, in India. But they failed to bring everyone over, and then they decided to use their militia, build a couple of strength points of armies, and get stuff into play. They're probably going to trigger the Baltic Company and get a buck on that while they still can. Spain built up forces in Central Europe, made another attack, lost, and the French landed and grabbed one of the Indian counters, a cheap one-pointer. Get some extra points for themselves there. They're not really able to do much against Britain, so by grabbing that, they took something maybe Britain wants away from, as well as getting some serious points for themselves. Russia failed in an attack on the Baltic, and then the Prussians failed in an attack on the Russians to try to equalize so that everybody gets 3 points in Africa. And to finish things off, the Dutch went into the Ottoman Empire. They had a naval advantage, or a slight advantage in the naval battle. They lost that, and then over here, facing in the Ottoman Empire, facing the Russians, they ended up with less points. But both sides rolled a 7, so each side lost an army. Everybody took unrest from that. Unrest levels are climbing kind of high on everyone. We're entering into the 5th and final round of this, the 3rd and final war. Whoopee. The Austrians took a chance here, doing 2 attacks on the British. The first one was at even odds. The second one, after they succeeded, was at +1. The second one didn't work, though, so they didn't completely knock the Brits out of here. That means, unfortunately, the Brits are still going to get a large score in Germany. They did knock them down low enough that the Dutch will get a large score as well. It's possible the Dutch could make a move against one of these German states. That would be a big move towards depriving the Brits of points. For the British own turn, they tried to move into Africa, but their fleet couldn't make it. So then they moved the army into the Baltic states and grabbed themselves a fighting withdrawal that'll help reduce their unrest if they have to get out of there quickly. That'll put us on to the Spanish. Spain also got mixed results. They wanted to try to wipe the Brits out of Central Europe. They succeeded on their first shot, an even roll. Now they're having to take unrest for every attack they're making, just because their finances weren't very good. They have the banking, which allows them to get more cash but they're not going to get to use that cash later in the game. The first attack succeeded, but the British played their fighting withdrawal chip there to avoid taking a loss and unrest. And then the second attack, well, it ended up as a loss for the Spaniards, so they took the additional unrest for that. And we keep pushing forward. The French failed to try to expand into Africa to take the dominant position there. They actually lost 2 units due to a roll of a 7, and then over here the Russians succeeded in the Baltic, knocking the last British force out of there, but they also rolled a 7 on their attack and took the additional loss. Got Prussia and the Dutch left. Not a lot they can do about the British. We'll see what they can pull off on their own. Prussians also tried to make an attack into Africa. That did not work for them, and they ended up having a unit they built. They have the militia advantage, so they get more units. Didn't make it over at all. Then the Dutch went for a high risk, low payoff attack in the German states, try to knock the British out into the next lowest level and get more points themselves. Well, they would get the same points. And that's it. We're done with this war. Let's see if anything exciting happens here. We do have to cope with the income and maintenance. It's possible that people have built so many armies that they're going to actually owe money and have to go into unrest for that. And I'll take care of that. And then we have to score the actual victory points for this war. There's no real end of war phase here to worry about particularly. But then the next thing we worry about is how does the unrest that's been associated with or assigned to all the countries affect their scoring position. So I'll do the income and maintenance, come back for the final scoring round, and then look at what the unrest effect is. So, in large part due to the higher populations that most of the countries had, or else the cash reserves in the case of Britain, those got tapped pretty hard. Nobody actually incurred any additional unrest due to having big armies at the end of the game. Now let's look at scoring, and it's the same as every other time, but I guess I might as well read it out here. So France gets 4 for North America, and the Dutch get 2. We're seeing this little race happening. Over here, Austria gets 5, Russia gets 3. Austria gets 5, Russia gets 3. South America, the Dutch get 5, and the French and Prussians each get 3. Okay, over in India, Russia gets 3, and France gets 2. That was Africa. India, Prussia gets 5, and the Dutch and French get 3. In the East Indies, Prussia gets 4, France gets 2. And we can see that English expedition there, it never really took hold. It couldn't because of this setup. No great loss, but it was kind of a wasted opportunity, I guess. All right, let's go to Europe. In the Ottoman Empire, Spain gets 4, and they finally score something. Russia gets 2. Over in the Mediterranean, Russia gets 6, Prussia gets 4. Okay. Let's go up to Central Europe. Britain and Spain each get 6. Over in the Baltic, Russia gets 5. And now we go over to Germany, and Austria is going to get the big 8 because they have more than anyone else. England gets 5, as do the Dutch. Now comes the big question. What's been hiding under people's, how much unrest have they got, and what does it mean? Well, start revealing. Spain has 13. France, we'll go to them. 5, 10, 12, I think this is, no, that's an English army. 12 for France. So we're seeing kind of where people are. Let's go to Prussia. We're kind of going backwards because we want to see what it costs. Only 9 for Prussia. That's kind of promising. Some of the others, wow, those are kind of big numbers. They're not likely to get a gain. And in fact, they can only knock down a couple of players unless people tie on this. Okay, the Dutch. The Dutch have 12. So right now 13s and 12s. Those are in the lead here. Austria. Austria worked their way up to 10. They're looking very good at this point. Now, of course, it depends. Where do Russia and Britain hit? If they're above 10, that could be good for Austria, very good for Austria. Okay, let's look at Britain. And Britain accumulated some here, but they're also at 10. And that means they're going to top Austria no matter what. And over to Russia. Russia took 12. So it looks to me like 13 is our lead here, right? Who had 13? Spain had 13. Are they the only person who had 13? Yes. So Spain loses 7. Now, if anybody had been at over 20, they would just lose the game and wouldn't even count towards this, I guess. But now we have to worry about those with 12, and they're each going to lose 4. That's enough to make a difference. And that's France, 8, 9, 10. Spain we already did. 12, the Dutch. The Russians. And Russia falls. They would have been in the lead otherwise, except for the unrest. And, you know, they're not that far above. They're 2 points above, say, the British or the Austrians, who ended up passing ahead of them. Well, that's about where we went. There's a few nice things that we saw here, even though I screwed up the rules so terribly, especially the combat rules. Things were a lot more random in the combat, I think, than the game intends it to be. Also, the diplomacy rules, not being able to focus on just on gaining the diplomacy in the areas you're intending to be in at any given time. I think that really hurt my playing as well. All told, though, I didn't enjoy this as much as I had hoped to, and I'm going to go into that a little bit in the review. It started out, I was really, really excited about the game, and I was really enjoying it. But as we got further and further, and more of these chips start coming, and I have to pay attention to so many different things, it becomes a painful sort of Euro. That's an aspect of the Euros that I really don't like. They look like light little fluffy games, and when you start having to pay attention to all these different counters and what they say on them and how they interact, that begins to make me a little bit more miserable. It's not as bad when I'm not playing solitaire, playing against other people, I'd guess, but it's still an amount of investment in everybody else's pieces and understanding of everything that they do that I don't really feel comfortable with. You could say, well, what about war games? Well, with a war game, I can look in the theater I'm working in and look at the counters that are there. And yes, mine and the opponent's, but it's not the same as having to look all over the board to see, oh, do you have a +1 against me here? How about here? You know, it's just the level of processing. Maybe it's because I'm getting older and it's a harder thing for me now to hunt those down on new games. Maybe it's because of the number of games I play, whatever. It is definitely a more irritating factor, and it really slowed down my play. At some point, slightly before I was reminded of all the rules I was screwing up, I realized I'm just not really enjoying this thing. You know, it really hooked me the way, say, Imperial did. And once again, I have my great words about motorcycle laws, emissions laws. But yeah, it definitely took away from the pleasure the same way that maybe Twilight Imperium did, but Twilight Imperium felt like it never got started until it got ugly. With this, I felt right from the beginning that I was involved in a cool game, you know, placing pieces everywhere and conflicting, trying to score points, etc. But as it started to wear on and more of these chits came into play, and there's more and more interaction between what I can do, it became more of a headache, and it just wasn't worth it anymore. Alright, I'm going to wrap this and I'll come back with a real review.